Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's Wednesday. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy, and the kid from the comic shop dropped off some stuff. You want to see what I got? Picks of the week. So, been going a little hard at the DC books lately because I've been enjoying them. I'm still an inveterate avowed Marvel zombie, but yeah, when I get around to reading some DC stuff, I'm always like, oh yeah, this is pretty. It really, the fun of it comes from not really being that invested in it, if you know what I mean. But I'll get into that. So yeah, fortunately, Galaxy of Comics was able to get in an order of some more recent trade paperbacks that I had been asking him about. He said I wasn't obligated. He didn't order them for me, but they were back in stock, so I could buy them if I wanted, and I did. And so I did. First up, I got Volume 6 of Deathstroke, subtitled Arkham. This is Deathstroke book by Christopher Priest, who's a tremendous writer, one of my absolute favorites. He was born Jim Owsley, and that was how his name first appeared when he started working at Marvel Comics, and then he quickly became the group editor for all the Spider-Man titles in the 80s, so he was kind of in charge of the Spider-Man books that I grew up on, and then I think he quit comics for a while. He also he created Quantum and Woody for Valiant. He was a big Jim Shooter disciple, so he went over to Valiant, and then I don't remember the timeline exactly, but at one point he quit writing comics to become an actual priest and then changed his name to Christopher Priest. And then he started coming back to comics. And then also his best and finest work would have been his run on the Black Panther in the late 90s, which a lot of the film stuff was lifted from that. If you ever get a chance, and I will try to find the link, but Christopher Priest used to write a regular blog on his website, and he would just deep dive into comic book industry stuff. It's real comic book nerd stuff, but it's fascinating look at the industry, especially coming from a guy who he's a black guy in a predominantly white industry, so there's that, but also just the horse shit that all comic is like. He had to deal with all the stuff that all comic book creators have to deal with while also being a black guy. It's a real interesting take on the whole thing, which I obviously would never experience on my own. So yeah, I like Christopher Priest is what I'm saying. So when they did the rebirth of the DC universe back in 2016, this was one of the books to come out of it, and I think it was the only. No, we'll talk about that. It was one of a couple of the rebirth books that I was into and following, and I only really had to drop it just because I wasn't working at a shop anymore. But it's great stuff. I guess that's all I'm really trying to get at. Speaking of which, we also had this Aquaman. This is also Volume 6. Oh no, it's now okay. This is Aquaman Volume 1, Unspoken Water. It's still the current Aquaman series, but that series was written by Dan Abnett. And so he started from Rebirth into number 1 and then up into issue 42. And I had that whole run. And then he left and Kelly Sue DeConnick took over as writer. I've very much enjoyed Kelly Sue DeConnick's work for the Marvel Comics group. Not so much her independent stuff, which is what I think she's probably more well known for. And not that it wasn't bad, it just wasn't for me. Like Pretty Deadly, which beautiful artwork by Sarah Rios, I believe, is the artist's name. I'm probably mispronouncing it even if I have it right. But the story I wasn't. But I did really like what she had done over at Marvel. She did a Spider-Man mini that I can't remember the name of now, but it was after Norman Osborn went to prison. So it was like a prison story. Yeah. And I haven't read Bitch Planet yet, which is not a Marvel book, but I hear nothing but good things, so I would like to get to that. But Aquaman is my favorite DC superhero. Like, he's my favorite member of the Justice League. And the Abnett line, or the Abnett run, was really good, and I'm sure the DeConnick one will be really good too. And it'll just be nice. This is all what I'm doing this week is catching up on Rebirth stuff that I ended up having to drop. This is another one, Justice League Dark Volume 1. This is actually Justice League Dark. Does it not have a subtitle? The Last Age of Magic. Because this is the second Justice League Dark title, if not the third. And as you can see from this lineup, it consists of Man-Bat, Zatanna, Swamp Thing, Detective Chimp, who's one of my favorites, and Wonder Woman. Why not? Leading it. And this came out of the No Justice series that DC did a couple years ago, where they split all of the Justice League up. It was kind of like a Contest of Champions, Secret Wars type thing. I have to draw a Marvel parallel for me to understand it. Where all of the Justice League got called off planet to fight a very major threat, and so we're split into 4 kind of random squads. So this was the Wonder Woman squad. Like, she was stuck with this motley crew of people that she hadn't really worked with. And it was a lot of fun. No Justice in general was a lot of fun, which I recommend. But then I've always liked Justice League Dark, the original series. I know Peter Milligan wrote it, and I know Jeff Lemire wrote it. I'm not sure which one started it. I'm leaning towards Milligan, but I can't be 100% sure. And I'm pretty sure the first one came out of New 52, and then they restarted it for Rebirth. But also, Detective Chimp was in The Secret Six, which was a book that Gail Simone wrote for many years. So I really liked that book. I love the Gail Simone. So those are the trades I got. And I also went ahead and picked up Bizarre Adventures number 26. I bought 25 last week. He's got a few of these, and like I think I said last week, I don't have a ton of these, and I've been really kind of jonesing for this era Marvel. This is like early 80s, but it's still kind of Bronze era 70s type stuff. And it features Cole the Barbarian, or Cole the Conqueror, is another Robert E. Howard creation, the creator of Conan the Barbarian. And I just this week finished reading a Conan novel, so I've been kind of feeling, I mean, never mind that it took me 6 months to get through that novel, because sword and sorcery is not my go-to genre, but it's still a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to reading that. Hence why I bought it. Dee-dee-ba-da-dee-dee. Now, let's do picks up last week. Da-da-da-da. Ha-da! Yeah, no, I got you. I'm listening. So last week I didn't get in as much reading as I wanted to, but I think you'll see the theme developing. First of all, I bought Action Comics Volume 1. This is obviously the current volume. This starts from issue 1001. So this is also Brian Michael Bendis' stuff. So last week I had read his just regular Superman title stuff, and the storyline in that was all about, it followed from Man of Steel, about Superman trying to find his son who's gone off into space with his grandfather, and so now Superman's they can't find him, so he's trying to locate him, and also battling Rosal, I can't remember the character's name, but it's a new character that Bendis introduced, and in a sort of retcon move, it turns out that he's the one who's actually responsible for the destruction of Krypton. So naturally, Superman and he had to have a frank exchange of opinion several times. It's pretty badass. The Bendis stuff, like I was saying last week, is a lot of fun. It's real action-packed. It's not, it's not heavy on continuity. It's really just like, okay, you know who Superman is. We'll set it up to this point, and then we're just going to go. You're not going to need to know what Jewel K is, etc., and stuff like that. Because I mostly know what Jewel K is from a Boris the Sprinkler lyric. This one, in a similar, it's similar, let me think how I want to say this. This Superman book is more Metropolis-based. It's more street level, for lack of a better word. And there's a running storyline. It's called Invisible Mafia is the subtitle of this trade. There's a lot of apartment fires. There's like a string of apartment fires in Metropolis, and Superman himself becomes a suspect in them. So naturally, that's a very fun thing. No, it was. As you'll see, I've been going back down Superman hole lately. Oh, folks. I've been like kind of a lifelong Superman fan, but I forget that that's the case at times. I got really into Superman, oddly enough, when the death of Superman became a thing, and up until that point, I was anti-DC, if anything. I had kind of started to weaken on that because Chuck Dixon was writing Guy Gardner, and I really like Chuck Dixon's writing. But then the Death of Superman came, and I was like, this feels like a good jumping on point. So yeah, and I started by, I think I had read a couple of the John Byrne Superman, which is still some of my favorite stuff. But yeah, I always kind of forget that because I do tend to lean towards the darker side. And so like a lot of people, it always feels to me like Batman is more popular because he's the grittier, darker one. But I find Superman to be more fun. Maybe I'm just getting old and not quite as cynical. But also Superman's more of a badass than people remember too. So I don't know. But speaking of which, another thing that has happened recently in continuity. Well, Warren threw in these for me last week, just in the back. I think I might have. Yeah, I must have shown them to you guys. But yeah, these Superman heroes, Superman villains. They both act as bridges that are also clearly intended for readers like myself who don't read a lot of DC as jumping on points. They're two standalone issues, but they set up the storylines. They kind of summarize the storyline thus far and set up the next one. But it's not like reading a synopsis. There's actual connecting stories, but they serve those functions. And again, a lot of fun. Another thing that Bendis has done recently is Clark Kent has revealed his identity to the world. So now the world at large knows that Superman and Clark Kent are the same person. He's still working on the Daily Planet. He's still married to Lois Lane. They have a kid named Jonathan. They're still trying to just live a normal life, but it's another one of those things that's deceptively simple. Like, well, why don't we do that and see what happens there? They did the same thing with Daredevil, which was in fact Brian Michael Bendis's thing. That was his storyline, and he was also the one responsible for Peter Parker revealing his identity. I'm detecting a pattern, but I think it's smart. I mean, it's not at this point an original trick, I guess. But it's smart because it does open up it's like, oh man, now we got to write a whole different kind of book. And, it's not like the old days where they wanted everything to be different but the same, not noticeable change. There's a very specific phrase that Stan Lee would use internally, and now the appearance of change. He didn't want anybody to actually change, he just wanted to look like it. That's why they killed Gwen Stacy off and stuff like that. And why they undid Peter Parker's marriage, blah, 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 blah. I hope they don't do that here. So this first book is about, and you see how he's got his glasses off there, how the Justice League, etc., are dealing with it. And a lot of the Justice League are pissed off at him for it, in fact. They don't think it's a good move at all. The traditional thing of, like, your, family and loved ones will be at stake. But fortunately for Clark's parents, they're under the protection of Bruce Wayne now, so they're fine. And Lois Lane can take care of herself. And, so it's good. And Wonder Woman loves it. She's like, because Wonder Woman doesn't understand the anonymity. At least if I'm remembering that right, which who knows if I am. And then this one, as you might have guessed, is from the opposite side of what the villains have to say. The way, and I'm not 100% on this because, like I'm saying, I haven't read a whole lot of it. It seems like in this world, Lex Luthor is on the outs. He doesn't own LexCorp anymore, I don't think. He's kind of a pariah. He's still a rich evil genius, but he's not really in a huge seat of power. And that feels like now that Clark Kent has revealed his identity, that might change a little bit here and there. So it's exciting. I don't know that I'll start buying any of these DC titles regularly once comics become a thing again, but I'm not adverse to the idea either. And then finally, I read volume 1 of Jimmy Olsen Adventures by Jack Kirby. There's a 2-volume collection. This was in the 70s when Jack left Marvel to go to DC, which was a huge deal even then. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the mainstream press gave a shit, but I think it probably got some more headlines than you might think. And anyway, so it was a big deal. And DC was so excited to have Jack, obviously. And Jack was excited. It was a big middle finger to Stan. And so they were, because he was like, I want to do the New Gods, and I want to do he had all these, characters that he had actually created while he was working at Marvel. But he was like, I already gave them the Silver Surfer, and they took that from me, so they're not getting any more things. So he took all those characters to DC. But DC was like, we really want you to do a flagship character and a book that sucks right now. And so they went with Jimmy Olsen. So that features Superman quite heavily. So that's like, oh, it's Jack Kirby drawing Superman. Like, it was a huge deal. That was how it was sold on the front cover of the first issue, if I'm not mistaken. And also, it was a book that nobody was buying. So they're like, it immediately... And it worked at first, but DC ended up not treating him any better than Marvel had, really. And it really... His intense heat that he'd had in the 60s was not the same. So a lot of his stuff... He wasn't selling like they had expected it to. Another poor treatment of Jack in this regard. You can't tell... From this cover, it looks to me like they use... This is just Kirby's art. But if you notice... Jack Kirby's art, DC didn't feel that he was drawing his face right. Because Superman, especially at the time, conformed to a house style. So he always had to look the same in any book. But Kirby is not, he's an original. He's a goddamn genius. So his art didn't look like anybody else's, and vice versa. So, yeah, they had Kurt Swan or somebody go in and draw the faces over Superman and Jimmy Olsen. And unfortunately, that's what's preserved in these collections here, because I don't know if those original pages even exist anymore. Or if they did, if anybody would give a shit enough to correct them, restore them. Still and all, having said all of that, it's exactly the kind of crazy, insane fun. And he ends up introducing a lot of... I think this is like the first appearance of Darkseid and a lot of the other New Gods characters. It started in Jimmy Olsen. Also featuring Don Rickles in a couple issues. It's ridiculous, and it's so much fun. I cannot recommend it enough. I have volume 2 that I'm going to hopefully sink into this week. I didn't get as much reading done this week as I had hoped, huh? Oh, well, I got way too much babbling done today as I'm listening. But I think that's it for today, you guys. And then hopefully, 2 weeks' time, maybe I'll actually have, new comics to talk about. But let's not hold our breaths, because that's 2 weeks away. That's too long to hold your breath. All right. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't hear the middle part. 2, 3, 4. Just start at the beginning. I'm not going to listen this time either.